So let's put into context where we are in the sales process. We've done our pre-meeting preparation and planning. That way, when we show up and we're face-to-face with the customer, the best version of us is showing up. Remember, the first thing that a client notices about us is our preparation. We begin the meeting using some of the tools we talked about, setting an agenda, doing a positioning or repositioning statement, building credibility for ourselves and ZO. In addition to that, we've worked on building likability. We may be asked a must react question to connect with them personally, which will also demonstrate that we've done some homework. And people always like clients, or especially salespeople, who are prepared and have done their homework. Next, we've asked some very powerful, impactful, and thoughtful questions. Not only have we asked, we've listened. And they know that we've listened because of two things. We ask follow-up clarifying questions so we know and completely understand this situation. And we ask questions because we know they need to tell us their story. It's important for them to tell us in their words. And then lastly, we have done a discovery summary. If you want to knock it out of the park, you've summarized the conversation, the key highlights, and if you really want to show off, you've used that mind map and you've done it very succinctly. At that point, you transition and you begin providing a solution, one that's tailored to them specifically. I like to think of it this way. You have got to earn the right to provide a solution. And unless you've done a thorough diagnosis, then you haven't earned the right. You're kind of taking a stab in the dark and you really come off like a salesperson. And this is more of a selling conversation and less of a buying conversation. I think I shared this before, but people hate to be sold, but they love to buy. And at this point, they should be in that buying mode and they want to move forward. And when we start offering solutions, this is just narrowing down the path to make sure you put together a solution that really fits the situation. So let's talk about some of the basic fundamental building blocks of a solution. And you can use these and pull in the right tools for the right conversation. So what specifically will we be going over in this module? It's right here above. We're going to talk about features and benefits. And this is one, if you've been in sales any length of time, you've heard of this. Yet, how are we executing on this? And then we'll talk about how we leak these features back to the conversation. This really takes features and benefits to another level, to that perfect 10 level. Then I'll share with you this acronym called SADTI. More on that later. You're going to have to watch. But this is a great acronym that can trigger ideas in different ways and things we can do and how we share our solution in the solution step. And then I'll go over some presentation techniques. So this module is loaded with a bunch of different techniques. And with your sales experience, you'll be able to grab the appropriate tool for the appropriate conversation and kind of mix and match depending on the situation. But there's loads of great stuff in here. What do you say? Let's jump in. I know you're saying to yourself, oh, features and benefits. Come on, I've been in sales a long time. I know what I'm doing. Exactly. And I always go back to the fundamentals never change. And in fact, I think this is where I know myself, salespeople sometimes get loose in the turns. And this is one of those fundamental sales skills, or I should say communication skills, that if we can execute these flawlessly, it can really make a big difference in how we're communicating. Have you ever gone to a meeting and you're providing a solution and you feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm all over the place? Well, features and benefits can help you communicate what you want to communicate, the most impactful and influential features of your product and service in a very succinct, client-centric way. So let's just review what we mean by features and benefits so we all are on the same page and all aligned. And I give you some examples in this paragraph up above. So first of all, a feature. A feature is a fact about our product or service. And when we say fact, it's something that can be backed up with evidence. It's indisputable, okay? So let me give you a couple of examples in there up here in the paragraph. One of the features of ZO Skin Health is it was founded by Dr. Obaji. And we know that. That's a fact that can be proven, right? No one's going to dispute that. The other thing is that he's been working in this industry and working with patients for over 35 years. Once again, no one's going to question that. So when we share these facts, that's great. And what I find is the more specific, the better. And just to illustrate that. So Dr. Obaji has been in this industry and passionate about this industry for 35 years. What if I said he's been in this industry a long time? It's not, necessarily not factual, right? But what's a long time? So when you want to be on your game, 35 years, little more specific, has more influence. These little things are those point twos. You guys got that? All right, so feature is a fact. We have some examples there. If you want to play along, write down an example feature that comes to mind, right? And don't underestimate. Sometimes the small things can have the most impact. Now, let me jump down to benefit. This is where I like to think everybody has an internal monologue. So if I share with somebody, ZO Skin Health was founded by Dr. Obaji, and he's been in this industry for over 35 years. Their inside voice might be saying to themselves, yeah, so what? And we have to always assume people have that inside voice where they're saying, so what? So it's important, if we want to be on our A game, anytime we share a feature, we share a corresponding benefit. It's how that client will experience the feature or why that feature is important and relevant. And based on discovery, you should be able to customize and tailor that benefit specifically to this conversation and put it into context. So feature, benefit. Now, how do we get them together? It's just like a bridge to cross a river. We got to connect them, and it's typically with a short phrase. And if you want to nail it, with the word you. This ensures that we're speaking directly to that client and we're tying this feature specifically to them. So as an example, ZO Skin Health was founded by Dr. Obaji, and he's got over 35 years of experience in this industry. Now, that's great for you because you'll be working with a company that has a passion for this, that has been in business and has a proven track record, and who's going to be working with you to help you be successful, not only with your merchandising, but in your practice. This is who we are and what we do. So, all right, I put a lot of frosting on that. I get it. But you get it, right? Feature, bridge, benefit. So put those all together, you're going to nail it. So you might just pause the video for a second and just think about this for a second. And write down an example feature that comes to mind, one that you might be using on a conversation coming up. Maybe think about a client conversation you just had. What are some features that you shared? And then build it. How can you connect it with a bridge? And then what was the benefit? And just fill that out, and that will help us really think and reflect on that. I've got some examples on the next couple of pages. Why don't we jump in and take a look at those? So on the next couple of pages, I've actually pre-filled some features and benefits. These are ones that I gathered from the field. People said they typically find themselves using. Of course, they're even better when you customize them to the client. But we wanted to give you some examples. Let me just jump to this third one here. We have a dedicated team of ZO educators. That's a fact, right? Now, right now, I'm not sure the number of those, but you might even put in a number of field educators. Again, in the spirit of specificity, because the more specific, the more influence it will have. Now, what would that mean to a client? You can fill that in. There's other features here as well. So professional treatments include ZO facial protocols, 3 levels of chemical peels, mild, aggressive, and physician only. Now, the benefit to you is you have 3 options, which will allow you to tailor your solution to the patient's needs. Okay. Now that's a little bit vague or generic, I should say. And you can customize that based on the conversation. So we wanted to give you some examples here. This last one I think is really critical. This one comes up often. We've got a successful and aggressive anti-diversion program. I bet you can add some more specifics to that as well. Now, the benefit to you, client, is it drives patients back to your practice to purchase the products because they can't get it on Amazon. They can't get it on eBay, and they can't get it in a beauty supply store. They can get it from you. So you guys get the spirit of this, right? So some examples, and this is just one of those techniques that if we want to add the point twos to our routine, then we can really be thoughtful about some of those key features and benefits that will help us share our message and our solution. And again, another page here. In this page here, I might just encourage you, if you want to really bring your A game today to this session, take a moment and just fill this out. Fill it out for the next client that you're going to be meeting with. If you have an upcoming prospecting appointment, maybe you can get prepared by writing down 2 or key features and benefits that you might share in your positioning statement, or how you build credibility before you jump into asking questions. So great stuff, isn't it? Simple, but it's all in the execution. All in the execution sounds simple. Now, here's how we can really, really add that additional point too, where we can take a feature and benefit and make sure it is specifically tailored to that client. And we do that by a link. And by adding link to the top, this ensures that we're linking it back to the conversation. So rather than do what I would call spray and pray, where we have loads of information, we've got tons of information on our product, on Zeo, etc., and we're so excited, we go in and we spray and pray, and we're just one feature and benefit after another, boom, boom, boom. And when we hit our clients or our prospects with too much information too soon, what happens is it gets overwhelming, and they're like, boom, taking one blow after another, right? And what happens in that case, it's information overload, and that typically causes paralysis. It's too much of a good thing. I like ice cream, right? But if I eat way too much, I'm going to get sick. And in sales, if we provide too much information, then our clients basically get sick, and they're like, oh, I don't feel so well. Why don't you come back later? Or let me think about it. That's how it comes out. So by doing thorough discovery, you'll be in a position where you can share the relevant features and benefits, and you'll know they're relevant because you can link it back to the conversation. So think of it this way. Don't share a feature and benefit unless you can link it back, because that will ensure that it's relevant to that client. So I've got an example here. Hey, you mentioned your staff thrives on education. Our clients say they value partnering with us because we have a team of highly trained educators. Now, the benefit to you is we're going to provide training to your team that helps them improve patient outcomes and what to recommend for home care. So there's another example down below here. Now, my advice is stop this video right now and think of an upcoming prospecting meeting that you're having, and based on what you know about them right now, create a link, feature, bridge, benefit. If you can do it here, you're more likely to be able to do it in the moment. If you're thinking, well, I can't think of a specific client coming up, then think about the last meeting you had, the last conversation you had, whether it was live or virtual. What were some features and benefits you were sharing, and kind of step back and deconstruct it and look at the mechanics of what you did. What can you learn from that reflection that can help you communicate even more clearly, succinctly, and powerfully in the next one? So love that, right? So we've got features and benefits. So now we have a link, feature, bridge, benefit. That really is going to help make sure we're communicating in a client-centric way. So here are some general tips on using features and benefits. As you sit down and read through these and reflect, circle 1 or 2 that catches your attention. And this might be a topic that you even bring up in your coaching conversation. But these pages are typically there just to slow down, reflect, and think about what you're doing and what you want to do, how you can bring your absolute A+ version out. So you're thinking, sad tie? What is that, something that I give my dad on Father's Day? No, it's not that. SADTI is just an acronym, kind of one of those crazy ones that might stick in your head, but it's a great way to use as a trigger for different communication techniques and how you share some of the solutions that you have for your client. Or I sometimes say options, because in the solution stage, oftentimes you're working with the client, you want to provide different options, and that way they're buying and they're making those choices. They're more likely to accept or move forward with choices they've made. We, of course, being a great salesperson, have narrowed those down to the most relevant ones that would have the most impact and make it easier for the client. So how can we upgrade what we're sharing? It's through some of these techniques here. So SADTI, what does it stand for? Stories, analogies, demonstrations, testimonials, illustrations, and examples. And you're doing this already. You might not be thinking deliberately about it, but in sales, if you're not using stories, you're probably not in sales. Stories are one of the age-old things that people use to communicate. It goes back to the Bible, one of those, that's an old book, right? Stories. And so if you look at any book, if you've been reading, any good book is loaded with stories. It's one thing to share concepts, like we have a great retail program, but it's even more powerful to share a story about a practice you worked with that sold $15,000 in retail in 1 hour, right? That story is going to have way more impact. Analogies. This is a quick, easy way to sometimes make a complex topic a lot easier, right? Or more memorable. So use analogies, and you're probably using them right now. Kind of some of the fun ones I like to use are, hey, he was all over that client like a hobo on a ham sandwich. All right, now I know it's funny, right? But we always use analogies, and all of these techniques are kind of intertwined because sometimes we use analogies in our story. So what is this thing that they can relate to, and how does it apply to what we're providing to them? Demonstrations, right? You talk about this. Hey, put this on your skin right now. How does it feel? Do a demonstration. Or you might be in a practice doing education. You can demonstrate how to merchandise or how to bundle or how to do a service if you're, a trained esthetician, right? Demonstrations or of how to apply eye cream, things like that. So it's one thing to say it, but to actually demonstrate it can be even more powerful. Testimonials. This is very powerful. A lot of clients, prospects, are motivated if they know someone else was successful. If they can hear that, hey, this can be me too. So how are you using testimonials? And can you build up a testimonial list? You probably build it up subconsciously, and maybe many of you already have some, but I'm a big believer. I keep notes on my cell phone, and I have stories and testimonials, and I flip through that screen before a meeting, and I'm like, oh, that's a good illustration, or that's a good testimonial that I can use. Some of you might actually have these in a printed form of a case study. And the other thing this makes me think about are white papers, right? A white paper may not be an official testimonial, but it's a documented, story illustration of one of our products or services. And the other thing is examples in as I just said here, white papers. So, are they all different? They all kind of tie together, but this is a good acronym to think about. And when you're going in to present a solution to a client, what are some of the things you can draw on that can help your solution come across more powerful and more understandable? I'm going to go into a little bit deeper in some of these to give you some further ideas and explanations on how you can, for example, tell a great story and what are some of the ingredients to a great story. I know we're into science, especially with what we're doing with our products. And so I had to put a little science thing here. If you're really interested, you can click on that link, Baroka's area of the brain. But this is the area of the brain that gets stimulated when a story happens. And it creates an even more connection, and it's even more powerful. So if you need some science to back up why to use stories in your solution, well, you can do some research there. But these are 6 benefits of exceptional storytelling presentations. I'm sure they relate. At this point, I would just encourage you to stop the video right now and answer these questions. Think about some presentations that you've heard in the last year. What ones do you remember? All right. What are some things that you remember? Right. I bet there's some stories there, and this would illustrate why it's so important for us to tell stories. You might even on this sheet here write down some stories you've told or ones you could tell, like, oh, I could tell the story of this practice who started here and came here. I could tell the story of this practice who used to use this competitor, and when they changed, what's happening now. We're not trying to talk bad about our competitors, but we can talk well of us. And of course, we can talk about, hey, they decided to move forward with ZO from SkinCeuticals. Here's why they did it, right? It's not you saying, hey, they're bad. This is why the client wanted to switch. And it's more of a story and an illustration of what we want to do. So jot down some ideas that come down here, and we'll take a look at some other techniques down below. So stories can be literally 1 or 2 sentences. And it's like sometimes we feel like, oh, we have to sit down and get the fire going, and I'm going to tell a story. Stories often are these quick, informal ways we share information, and we're all doing it. Now, if you want to really knock one out of the park, maybe have a planned one, and maybe it's a more formal presentation, you might want to take a look at your story and how you're sharing it. A couple of things when I coach people when they're telling stories, especially one they're kind of planning to tell, is number one, start with action, or as it says here, a startling statement or fact. One thing I avoid doing, and I was coached on this, is, hey, starting out like this. Hey, I want to tell you a story. It's not gonna, be the end of you. At the same time, if you want to grab people's attention right away and kind of suck them in, and think about it now, if you're watching TV lately, remember how they used to start off with, coming up, is going to be Tool Time, right? Or whatever show that comes up. They used to show like all the starting just regular video. And now they actually start out the content of the show. You're actually right in the middle of it. It started, and then they break away and they give you like, oh, here's the show that's going to happen. And then you go back into it. So you might have noticed that like on Netflix or Prime or what have you. So we can use that same technique to grab people. So start right into the action. So as an example here, the old way might be, hey, I want to tell you a story about a client we had that did $15,000 in retail. Instead, start out with, in 1 hour, we had a client that sold $15,000 in retail. Now, at that point, people are like, I need to hear this, right? You've engaged them. And then as you look through here, these are some of the things you can incorporate into the story that can help it have even more oomph, right? So I talk about the Goldilocks principle. You have to understand what's the right temperature. How much detail do you need to share that makes the story interesting and impactful? At the same time, be careful you don't try to pack too much in there, because sometimes that can, people disengage. So this is at least a story structure that can help you think about what are some stories that you're telling right now and how can you improve them. Maybe I need to add more characters or bring those characters to life because they have an important impact on the people that I'm talking to. The challenge people had. So what was it they had to overcome? Hey, prior to this, they didn't sell retail, right? And that might relate to the client you're talking to. Like, we sell retail, it's just not that much. We're really, more focused on our protocols and our services. And, if people want to do that stuff, we encourage it. We just don't tie it in. So that might be how you share the challenge. And then what was the solution that client took on, right? What did they do because of that challenge? And what was the result? More than likely, you're sharing a result that's positive. But sometimes, because we need to create a little bit of pain to maybe move forward, the result might be poor, right? So, and based on that story, what advice do you have for them? So this is an example structure. If you really want to take your storytelling to the next level, maybe you have a more formal presentation and you're going to be telling a story and using that as a framework that you can weave throughout your presentation. You might reference this page here. And there are some storytelling techniques here. So if you want to pause the video right now, you might take a piece of paper out and think about some of the stories you're telling, or, more importantly, think about one story that you've used several times. And if we can nail telling this story, this is something you can use in a lot of different appointments. So we all have multiple accounts, and it's a delicate balance of prospecting for new business and then growing our existing business. And so what I've found, most people are meeting with their clients either on a monthly or quarterly basis and specifically going over their business metrics. So a business review meeting. Obviously up front, when we build the relationship, we build an annual plan, we might have an event calendar and so forth. But as we have these regular meetings, we're revisiting some of those topics. So take a moment and think about what you're doing right now, or if you're new, what your thoughts are moving forward in terms of the frequency or cadence you'll meet with your clients. Obviously, there are going to be one-off meetings. Maybe a new product came out, or maybe you're doing education, things like that. But as a regular business practice, chances are you should be sitting down, reviewing results, making sure our plans align, and helping them create a strategy and plan for the next period, whether that's a quarter or a business. So how often do you meet with your clients and review their business? And what are some of the benefits of doing an MBR, monthly business review, or QBR? And how do you decide on the timing? And what do you currently do to prepare for these meetings? What reports do you pull? What's enough information but not too much? What are some reports you might bring just to have access to if you have time or it's relevant? So how do you prepare? So pause the video right now, take a moment, and complete this page. Whether you're new here at ZO or you've been recently joined the team, chances are you have some experience here. And it goes back to planning and preparation. The planning and preparation is going to help ensure that when we meet with somebody, we're going to be on point, we're bringing value, and really this is meant to slow down and reflect. This may be a great conversation to have with your sales coach. So think about an upcoming meeting that you have, and you might look at this sheet here. What are you going to do to prepare? Review what you'll do to prepare with your sales coach and get their input. Maybe they can help you be even better, maybe point out a blind spot. And these are great meetings when you kind of walk away saying, that's a good idea. I feel even better about this meeting. And 99.9% sure that if you talk this over with your sales coach, then you absolutely will have even more success in your quarterly review. A technique or skill that we talked about earlier as well was using an agenda. When we're able to communicate an agenda prior to the meeting in the form of an email, then that's going to demonstrate to our client that we're prepared and that we are going to be on topic. And what happens is they tend to take the meeting more seriously as well. I don't know about you, but have you ever gotten into this routine where, oh yeah, we're always on for this day and this time, yet you didn't send out an agenda and all of a sudden they don't have the time, or, oh, I forgot you were coming today. I'm not saying that's happened to you, but it happens to the people over at Skin Medica all the time. Well, that's not nice. All right. Anyway, but when we have our agenda, it makes sure we slow down, reflect, how am I going to bring value in this meeting? And so this is just that framework again of using the agenda. Start out when we meet with them, obviously thanking them for taking the time out. And then what's the purpose of our meeting? What are the topics we're going to go over in the outline? ensure that we get input for them. In addition to these items, what else do you want to make sure we talk about? What else is on your mind? And then, of course, transition into the first topic. One of those fundamental things, but this one thing, I guarantee you, if you invest just a little bit of time here, it's going to make your next meeting go even better. I feel like your confidence level will go up. So here's a worksheet. Now it's your chance. Right now, take a moment. Think about an upcoming review meeting that you're going to do and put down the agenda for that specific meeting. And then after that, if you really want to show off, go on email and write that email and send it out to that client, that next meeting. I guarantee you, you're going to feel even better about that meeting, and you're really going to bring your A game. So by now, you probably realize I like templates. Templates like these help my best version of me show up because I don't have to rethink everything every single time. I'd love your advice on this, but this is something that I put together based on what I've learned about you and working with different AEs into the field. So this might be how you prepare for your quarterly meetings. Take this out. You may go to the extent where you actually fill it out, or you might just glance at it to make sure you're hitting all the points that you want to hit. So you can take a look at this. I think the best way to get acquainted with this form is just to stop the video and fill it out right now. And I'll just give you a little bit of information or background on why I have these certain items in here. But up above is you typically want to review what's happened in the past. So you can dive into what you learned, what was working, what was not working. You might even up front think about how you can complement them, identify a specific metric. Remember features and benefits, right? What's a data point that you can share with them that would highlight, hey, great job. It's one thing to go in, you guys have done a really good job, right? You might start off with that startling statement, 47,000. That's the highest sales number I've seen from one account in 1 month, like yours. So how are you going to open up your meeting? That type of thing. What else is working, right? Kind of bright spots. Too often we go to what's not working, and it's really critical to take time to talk about what is working. So look, if you think of this, if you have children, when we look at their report card, where do our eyes go? So say they have 4 subjects. Let's just keep it simple. And they had 3 A's and 1 B. What do you talk about first? Oftentimes it's human nature. Hey, why didn't you get an A in this one? What happened, right? Versus, wow, you got an A in math? What did you do to get that? What else? Oh, you got an A in science? Tell me about that one. Build on success. And you know what's going to happen? Now, if I talk to my daughter, she'll want to talk about the B and how she can get better. Now they're engaged. They feel more like a conversation and less defensive versus, so why'd you get a B in this? Then they get defensive. So it's the same thing here. You might look at certain metrics that you want to talk about. I don't know if 4 is the right number, maybe only 2 because I don't want to confuse things. But what's 1 or 2 metrics that really we can build on and drive upon? What's not working and challenges certainly come out. But if we talk about the good, often the challenges will come out organically and that more of a collaborative way versus defensive. I'm not sure that they would get defensive, especially have a high trust level with them, but some accounts can. And sometimes we work with some clients that tend to be defensive. Talk about the good that will reduce their resistance and more than likely help them trip over the truth. A repositioning statement. So what do we need to remind them of? Some of those things that we do, have you ever worked with an account and it's like, gosh, I think I've told you about this protocol or this procedure like 5 times before. And, sometimes we need to make sure they're busy, right? They got a lot on their plate. So what are some things we need to remind them of so it stays high on their radar because it's really critical? Remember, they've got a lot of things on their plate in addition to merchandising and, additional products. So It's our role to make sure we keep things on their radar that are important to them. And I like this question. This one I incorporated because it's worked well for me as well. What is the one thing that would make the biggest difference to success with you? And you might share an insight with them. You walk in there. That's where you become a true trusted advisor. And then, of course, what's next? What are you going to provide is the next step? Maybe it's logistical, like setting up an event or co-sponsoring an event with them. Maybe it's doing an incentive for their client, their estheticians, or maybe helping, whatever it is, providing them something. But you can prepare for that, and then any practical next step. So what do you think of this template? Again, my advice, stop the video and just complete it for your upcoming next business review. And then let me know what we can do to make this even better. This is a presentation framework, if you will. So this might be helpful if you're preparing a more formal presentation. I was able to sit in on some of the webinars that the educators were doing. And in that context, they have a framework. I just observed this that they do, right? It's pretty simple, but when you think about it, it helps you prepare for your presentations, again, in hitting the main kind of structure of it. I know you're not new to presentations, but this might help you slow down and think about that. And let me just review a couple of things that I know cross my mind is, number one, how do I want to open? And we've talked about different things like telling a story is a great way to open because you're going to engage your audience. And what I have been coaching people on is to avoid those old scripted openings. So what I mean by that, you want to break the script and kind of grab that audience's attention. And if you think about like the first 60, 90, 2.5 minutes of your presentation, if you really are thoughtful about that, then you're going to get off to a great start. And too often we've thought about the body of our presentation and we've gotten to that point, but we opened up with less kick than we'd like. So I'm a big believer in think about your opening, be deliberate about it. What's a story you're going to tell, a startling statement that you might use to get their attention, things like that. The next thing is the body, right? It's just like going through an agenda. What are the key topics? I believe 3 to 4 is like the max kind of key topics you want to cover. Otherwise, you're doing probably a full course, right? But it's more memorable when you can share 3 things. I like the 3x3 technique. So what I mean by that is you're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. You're going to tell them, and then you're going to tell them what you told them. So what would that sound like? Hey, today we're going to talk about the solutions module. We're going to talk features and benefits. We're going to talk about this acronym called SADTI, and we're going to talk about presentation techniques. So first, let's talk about features and benefits. And then I'd go into and talk about them. Then I talk about SADTI. This is the body. And then I wrap up and I tell them what I told them. So in the end, I would wrap it up with a nice bow. So today, folks, we drilled down into 3 key topics: features and benefits, SADTI, and presentation techniques. So you see that kind of how you encapsulate it. So that's the body of your presentation. We often have Q&A. And so when we do Q&A, sometimes that occurs throughout our presentation, and that's fine. Or you might want to have people wait for the end. That's fine as well. You're going to be in the best position to decide what makes sense. I found in general, it's skewed to allowing for questions and answers throughout because it's going to drive up engagement. It's going to also ensure that someone doesn't get in their head a question and they don't listen to the rest of your presentation, or they disagree. And so all of a sudden, anything you say after that point, they're like, I can't trust this person. So you want to encourage those questions. Now, on the other hand, there are some cases where it's like, hey, let me get through the material. Chances are I'll answer your questions. But as I go through that, if you would, just take a piece of paper out and jot down questions you have. And that way, at the end, if you still have them, I'd be more than happy to answer them. So Q&A, and then of course closing. Just like opening our presentation and being thoughtful about how we're going to open, it's the same thing at the end. How are we going to close so we come down for a nice landing? Have you ever been on an airplane? And I think of this as, I know it's a Navy pilot, because you come down and you hit the runway and it slams down. And chances are you've been on a few of those flights where it's slammed down, and every once in a while you like catch yourself, right? It's the same thing with some presentations. Sometimes it's not so much a slam down like that, but it's like, did we land, and like, are we still going on, right? People aren't quite sure. How are you going to land the plane? Okay, be deliberate about closing it out and how you can start strong and end strong. And so these are some things to think about. And you have got some techniques, you've got the skills to do this. But if you just think about the structure of the presentation, it might be helpful in making them even better. So this is a quick checklist that you could review. And this might be a great time for you to slow down and just reflect on your presentations and some areas that you'd like to improve upon. A few things here. I'm not going to read every one, but I do want to comment on a couple that I think are especially relevant. Is whenever you're presenting, we know your audience. And what I've found really useful is just doing research on my audience. Now, if I'm presenting to 6 people and it's a really important meeting, I'm going to research all 6 people. I might do reconnaissance in the form of even calling up people who know these people and find out what they're like and how they like to communicate, what their hot buttons are. I might not have the luxury of those types of contacts, so I'm going to look at LinkedIn. I'm going to do my Google searches on them. It's, these days, cyber stalking is perfectly fine. You might even connect to them on LinkedIn. If you don't currently have a connection to them, you might say, hey, I'm looking forward to meeting you, and write them a note in LinkedIn and connect to them. So that's going to actually set you apart right from the very beginning. But know your audience and think it through, and what is their communication style? What's going to resonate with them? What's going to influence their decision? In addition to that, is if I'm meeting with multiple people, who is the key decision maker? I want to bias my communication and style to them. Not that we're going to ignore everyone else, but of course, there's always typically one if we're, say, meeting in a practice. Now, if you're going to do a more general presentation, obviously, if you meet with 50, 75, 100 people, maybe you got a few minutes in front of a big networking group or a trade association type thing. You can't research everyone, but you can research some individuals, which would give you an indication of what that audience is. So I talked about this. Reach out to the audience member prior to. So, hey, what are you hoping to get out of this presentation or meeting? Getting their input of what they expect. These are 2 things that are relatively simple, don't take a ton of time, but man, number one, you're going to be more relevant. In addition to that, man, when you do this, you begin to start a relationship before meetings and presentations, and your confidence level goes through the roof. A couple other things, of course, practice, arrive early, whether it's virtual or in person. Be careful you're not cutting it close if at all possible. That alone can kind of put us off our game. So I'm a big believer in that, and some other things here. So what catches your attention? Circle this, and this might be a point you want to have a conversation with your sales coach. Like, ask them, hey, what do you do in this area? What kind of research do you do on the audience members? How do you know the audience members? How do you communicate to different styles? Or maybe you even just talk about an upcoming presentation you're going to do and some of the audience members. That can be the topic you talk about. That's how you use this playbook, is by taking the topics and then putting them into practice. And what makes it even better, talk to another colleague, your sales coach, your director, your VP. Call Nancy. She'll talk to you about it. She's passionate about this stuff. And that way you're going to bring your absolute A game. Pretty cool stuff, right? Sorry, Nancy. So COVID has accelerated this virtual trend. I mean, we've all been doing some form of virtual meeting in the past. And thankfully, I've been doing virtual meetings for the last 6 years. And I accelerated and now do the majority of my work through virtual meetings. One of the things I realized is virtual meetings, I used to say to myself, oh, virtual, that's way different than being in person. And when I sat down and I began preparing for my virtual meetings, I realized they actually are more common, have more things in common than they do that they don't. So a lot of techniques that we use for in-person meetings transfer and translate over to virtual meetings. But you might want to think about that. Take a moment and reflect on that. In your opinion, how are virtual and in-person meetings the same? And then how are they different? See if you come up with that same insight. You'll see that a lot of the techniques that we use can be used both virtually and in person, and some of them can easily be adapted. And then next here is, what are some practical ideas, tool techniques, etc. So we're looking for real details. And I find that you can answer this question by thinking about a meeting you just had. It might be yesterday, might have been earlier today, or a meeting you're going to have. As you think about that virtual meeting or in person for that matter, what are some things that you can do to make it even better? And I'll just kind of, grease the skids here a little bit. If I'm doing a virtual meeting, I might be using the chat box. That's a simple little thing. And I might ask my participants, hey, in the chat box, write one question you'd like to get answered today in today's session. In the chat box, write a question you have about our new eye cream and how it's applied. In the chat box, write and tell us about one client that you think is a good fit for this protocol or this product. In the chat box, write in one client that recently purchased a ZO product and what was it. So, okay, I went off on a tangent there, but because I'm a big believer in virtual, using that darn chat box. It's simple and it's a great way to get people engaged. But there are some other things out there, and I'm positive that you're doing some of them, or if you've been on more virtual meetings, you've been on the other side of them. And then finally, what are you going to put into practice? Again, these are good ideas, but we got to put them into practice. So here are some tips, and I collected these from not only people here at AEs here at ZO, all these letters. I've collected them working with all of my clients, and this is kind of a culmination of some of those key ones. So what my advice would be is to just pause the video right now and read through these. What ones resonate with you? What could you add to this list? You might identify one that you're excited about putting into practice or doing in your next upcoming virtual presentation or meeting that you're having. So pause the video right now, and then I'll come back and I'll share with you a couple of highlights or things that I find especially critical. Did you pause it? Did you pause it now? Okay, I'm going to pause it now, and I'll come back in a moment. So for virtual meetings, I often hear it's hard to get feedback from people, or if you want to watch a really fun YouTube, it's a conference call in real life. You can just Google it, but it really illustrates how people talk over one another and bad connections and things like that. And we've all been part of that. And with the new tools out there and some proper planning, we can make these calls go way better. So if you're looking to really get your audience engaged and make them part of the conversation and presentation, these are a couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, help them help you. Send an agenda. Let them know you'll be talking about. Let them know what you're going to be asking of them. Hey, we'll be using the chat box, and we're going to be asking you to get active in there by sharing some questions or sharing with us some of your past clients, things like that. And then the other thing is, you could even specifically reach out to individuals and send them an email. Hey, Bob, I'd like to ask you to share a little bit more about that client that you did the peel on. and how it worked out. So you can do this, with a few select audience members. So now they're ready to get engaged. And when you call on them in the meeting, they can bring their A game. If you're doing an internal meeting and maybe your regional vice president asked you to do a session on prospecting, well, then you can assign even subtopics to people and have them do it. So that way it's more collaborative meeting. And the other things here, the technology, practice. I'm a big believer, if at all possible, use video. I know, unfortunately, I'm the person in this video, and that's certainly one of the drawbacks, but we all know video, it just drives engagement to another level. It's easy to get distracted these days. Our phone rings, or Facebook just alerted me on something, or the deal, right? Or, I got to shop for that thing on Amazon. So video really helps with engagement, and it's not so much to check on people, because we want to be so good that they want to be on the call. And then I've talked about the chat box way too much already. Polling, multiple choice questions can be incorporated. My advice is build them prior to, but again, the more you get and give the audience the opportunity to engage, the better. So some techniques here, and more importantly, what one will you put into practice and make your next virtual meeting and presentation go even better? So I shared the presentation template, or I should say structure. It's where you open, you share the body of what you're going to share, Q&A, in closing. So this is some illustration, some additional information on incorporating in each step of that process. So opening to engage. I talked about that, trying to gain people's attention. So if you really want to script out the first 2 to 3 minutes of a presentation or a solution that you might be sharing, and maybe you're getting some people on a virtual conference call or a virtual meeting to share maybe your retail plan, for example. So when you look at the first 2 minutes of your presentation, you might be looking at, first of all, how are you going to open? Be super thoughtful. Gain their attention might be a startling statement. The agenda, what are you going to cover? What are the key topics, or if you will, the body of the presentation? If relevant, your client-centric introduction. If they know you, that's obviously not necessary. So you can decide whether or not, but you may need to build some credibility with them. So how can you do that with a client-centric introduction? And then transitioning into your first topic or the body of the presentation. And if you're like, well, I don't have a lot of time to practice, my advice, practice this opening, because how it starts is how it goes. So think deliberately and thoughtfully and intentionally about your opening, and your meetings will go that much better. So here's specifically the opening to gain attention. And these are some examples. It goes back to satire and things like that. But share a startling statement like $15,000 of retail in 1 hour. That's a statement that creates like, what? It causes people to sit up in their chair, right? Or a story. A story generally gets people engaged immediately. And if you can use that story throughout the presentation or meeting, it's a good reference point and makes all of your content and information more memorable. Just like we started out this program with the Olympic story, the point twos, we're able to incorporate that throughout because that theme is relevant throughout the training. So pay a compliment, ask a question. These are all different ways that you can use to open up your meetings or presentations. So there's a worksheet here. Again, if you want to really bring your A game, you would pause the video right now and think of a meeting or presentation that you have coming up, and think about how you can apply this and make that next one the best one you've ever had. These bullets do require a little bit of context. So if you are going to be presenting using a PowerPoint, for example, opening up with a picture. Now, let me give you an example. If I were presenting, say, in Michigan, and I wanted to use some data, and somewhere around the number 100,000 comes into play in some fashion, I might show the picture of Michigan's stadium. And if I'm working in Michigan, people will know that stadium, right? It's very popular. So you might ask the audience, hey, who can tell me, what stadium this is? And the people are like, go blue, it's Michigan, right? For some of you, that means nothing. I get it. But if it's relevant to my audience and they got that, I got them engaged. Like, what's this all about, right? Who can, and people like to answer questions, especially when they know the answer to the question, right? Hey, who can tell me what stadium this is? Oh, that's Michigan. Go blue, right? Tom Brady, right? So now you got them engaged, right? Next question. How many people fit in this stadium? And then you'll have more people. Oh, 100,000. And they'll come up with a number. And then how do I pivot from that? Say, do you realize over 100,000 people are going to dermatologists each year looking for solutions for rosacea? Don't use that one. I just made it up, right? But you see how you can tie it into your subject matter, and you can open up with some power, with a story. The other thing is might be a picture of a patient or a nurse or a doctor doing a procedure, right? It's going to gain their attention. And you can add some questions to that. Hey, how many clients do you see each day, right? You get a number and you get them thinking. In another one, a picture of a product or its components. So we do this, right? We put the picture up there and we might ask a couple of questions to get their eyeballs to the picture so they can answer the questions. Again, eyeballs and verbally getting them to answer. The other one, these are just general examples, right? Is you might print out, I call it MapQuest or, Google Maps, and it could be from your house to their practice. And you put it up here and, hey, this is how I figured out how I was going to get here today. And the reason I show this is because today we're going to work on our business plan, and we're going to figure out how we get from where we are in our retail to where we want to go, which is this. And so our agenda today is to, number one, let's decide on and agree on what's our destination. What are we looking to achieve by the end of Q1? And then number two, we're going to talk about the different stops in our route to get to that. So you kind of see how you can add some flavor and a little bit of intensity or engagement and make your meetings even more memorable and fun, all right? That's just something to think about. These are some ideas here. By the way, if you ever want to, I love strategizing with people. If you're doing a presentation or a meeting and you're looking for ideas, hey, reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to kick around some ideas and help you put one together that's going to be just off the charts. So we're still in the opening, and this is where we open to engage. The next is we set the agenda. People want to know what you're going to be talking about. So again, this applies to virtual or in person, and we went over this a little bit earlier. So what's the purpose of the meeting? What are the key topics you're going to cover? Gain their input. What else would you want to talk about today? What other questions do you have? Again, get those on the table early. Be careful not to jump into those and get ahead of yourself, but that way you're going to have a more engaged audience. And at the same time, if they want something addressed, you can assure them that you'll address it during your presentation. Now, if it's not relevant, at least you'll acknowledge it and you can table it for the appropriate time. Because sometimes there are those one-off topics you want to make sure you don't go down a rabbit hole. And if you do that, and it's more of a one-on-one thing, you and I know the rest of the audience disengages. So get this stuff up front, out early, acknowledge, and address the ones that make sense. And I talked about the 3x3 technique, and that's referenced here. 21 years ago, when I got into this business, I was taught by this guy, Steve. And Steve had been in the business prior to me about 15 years. And he was taught by his mentor, who had been in the business for about 20 years. And they came from the Dale Carnegie organization. And Dale Carnegie, if you know anything about them, it's Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Anyway, they've done thousands, millions of sessions around the world. But the reason I share that is some of the techniques that I've picked up on are proven and they're great to engage audiences. One of the ones that is especially memorable is transitioning from slide to slide. And when I began presenting and doing meetings, Steve would sit down with me, would be at his kitchen table at night if I had a presentation the next day. And if I had I'm going out of a manual or I'm using PowerPoint, he would ask or require me to have a way out of each slide. How am I ending this slide? And if it's going to transition into another slide, specifically, how am I going to transition? Now, that transition can be using satire, right? You might tell a story. You might use an example, right? But how do you take it from slide to slide? And chances are, if you just slow down and think about, okay, what am I saying on this slide? What do I want to make sure the audience hears? And how am I going to end it? And how am I going to connect this slide to the next slide? And there's no real rocket science to this other than slowing down and thinking about what you will do. I don't know about you, but I've done presentations before where it's like, I'm like, next slide, next slide, next slide. It gets very old and it doesn't feel like it's a fluid story. So if you are presenting a slide deck, slow down and think about how are you getting from one slide to the next? Or if you're especially moving from one major body / topic, how do you reintroduce and make it clear you're in that new section of the presentation? Take a moment, think about this, answer these questions, and more importantly, put it into practice. What's a presentation or meeting you have coming up? What are a couple of slides you'll be presenting? Just do the first few slides. How are you going to get from slide 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4? Sound fair? I know you're like, oh, is this module going to ever end? Well, it did end. There's a lot of things here, and to summarize, there's a lot of different ways you're communicating with your clients, from virtual to in person, from working with estheticians to working with, practice managers, to working with physicians, to working with groups, to working at networking events or industry events. There's so many different ways you're communicating. What we try to provide you is some different communication techniques that can help you share your ideas, your solutions in a way that are going to have the most impact. If you're trying to influence someone's decision to purchase or partner with ZO, then that's your goal. And maybe you're trying to influence estheticians to use your product or change the way they do a procedure based on some information that you have. That's a little bit different conversation. But these things here, features and benefits, using satire, using presentation techniques, can help us have even more impact on how we're presenting these solutions and options to our clients. These are great things. More importantly, they're great if you put them into practice. So what are one or two things, highlights from this module that you can share with your coach? Like, you know what I liked about this one? This stuck out and this stuck out. I'm motivated to use this one. And what are one or two topics that you can talk to your coach about? Again, to kind of dive into this subject a little more. And my advice is make it practical. Think about an upcoming meeting or presentation you're doing and some of the techniques that you can use here, and just plan a 15, 20-minute conversation with your coach and dive into the details and see how you can squeeze everything out of it. I know you can do it. Okay, that's the solutions module. More to follow.